I only have my distinguished guest, Dr. Gary Wolfram, for 2 segments, and we often get quite in-depth into the issues we're going to talk about, because what they're also looking at doing here is reforming Proposal A. We talked in depth about it yesterday. I wasn't able to get Dr. Wolfram on air about it. He had to teach, and he has to teach at the bottom of this hour, so we want to hurry up and get him on. We did speak to Michael Lefebvre yesterday James Holman from the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. He gave you his thoughts. What is Proposal A, for those of you who may not remember? Back in 1994, they capped the annual growth in taxable property value here in the state of Michigan at the rate of inflation, or 5%, whichever is less. And that was done to protect property owners from back then being runaway tax increases during a boom economy. Now they're saying many in city management, as well as mayors and legislators, are saying it's not catching up fast enough. We're not making enough money from the property taxes, so they want to look to, quote unquote, reform it. In an article about this in the Detroit News yesterday, Gary Wolfram, Dr. Wolf, you know what? Dr. Wolfram, they didn't even give you the title doctor, and you worked hard for that. Dr. Wolfram was quoted saying nobody was thinking about what would happen to local units of government if the property tax values were to collapse. So let's welcome to the Live with Renk Show once again, Doctor, because you earned that, Wolfram, from the Hillsdale College. He holds the
William Simon Chair.
William Simon Chair of Economics. And you didn't show me that chair when I came to meet you last summer. I need to see that chair. I want to see how beautiful it looks. But real quickly, you heard me lay it out, Dr. Wolfram, and they did come to you, the Detroit News, for a quote, although they kind of poo-pooed you. They didn't give you that PhD there. Anyway, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, it has been basically local units of government have been under a strain since the Great Recession happened. There was two big things happened. One is revenue sharing collapsed. That is, in order to keep the statewide spending up, the Granholm administration cut back on revenue sharing. Now, Michigan is what we call a home rule state. That is, Michigan is really sort of on this Jeffersonian democracy that you expect your government that's closest to you to be able to do the most of your expenditures and your services. Now, the way to do that is we have to collect revenues. Like Hillsdale couldn't have its own sales tax, or couldn't have its own income tax, because people would move about, right, to cross the border. So we collect the income tax statewide, and we collect the sales tax statewide, and the corporate income tax statewide. And then the idea is to return a fraction of that back to the local units of government, so that the local units of government would be the main government that you deal with. Unfortunately, what happened was the local units of government's revenue sharing has been decimated. And, you know, I always say that what we ought to do is we ought to lower taxes by not lowering the state income tax, but rather increase revenue sharing and let local units reduce their taxes. But combined with that, we had the primary revenue source, then local revenue source for local governments, is the property tax. That really most local units of government, that's their sole revenue source. So in the early 90s, what was going on was that you had property values rising, and so without raising the tax rate, your property taxes would keep going up. So there were people that were, let's say you were, a retired couple, and your property values are going up and your property taxes going up, but your income isn't going up. So that was putting a constraint on people. So they said, hey, how about we limit the amount of increase in your property taxes if you have your primary residence until you sell it. What we'll do is we'll only let it go up by 5% or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. Now, we weren't used to inflation rates at 2% at that time, right? So what happened was that passed, but no one was thinking, oh, what will happen if we get a 30% drop in property tax base? Because when that happens, the local unit of government's, collecting the revenue to do police and fire, and, basically the local units do essential services. So the local unit's doing that, and then what happens is the property tax base collapse. Well, if it goes down 30%, it can't go, and then let's say property values return, right? We get out of the Great Recession, property values start increasing again. Well, they can't go back up at the same rate at the property tax base is going up. The taxable base can only go up at 2% or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. So if you have inflation of only 2%, and let's say your property tax base went down by 20%, it'll take you 10 years to get back to where your property tax base was before. So that led to local units of government delaying the things that they could delay spending on. They cut, actually there's a pretty substantial decline in employees, but one of the things that you can delay on is what? Roads, right? You could delay, okay, we're not going to fix that road till, next year or whatever. And so that's led to a decline in the quality of the infrastructure, particularly on local roads.
Right. So that being said, and because it's either 5% or a rate of inflation, which is lower, whichever is lower, and as you stated, they're going to, it's been the rate of inflation because it's been lower than 5%, that these local government units are underfunded. So what do you see as, so it sounds like you're in favor of reforming Prop A.
That portion of Prop A, and what I would do is I would say that if property values have declined, then the property tax base, your taxable base, can go up by whatever the market rate is going until you get back to where you were. Then when you get back to where you were before the collapse, then it kicks back in. It can't go up by 5% or the rate of inflation, whichever is lower. So I would just allow for a recovery of the tax base that was unexpected.
So that recovery would be what would you base that on? Well, it looks like I got to go to a break. Think about that. How are you going to base that on a fair number to the people? We see statewide the economy comes back X, or what number will you be using as a basis in your humble estimation to increase during this recovery phase the property tax base up until the recovery is completed? And then at that point, you would go back to, it sounds like, 5% or rate of inflation, whatever lowest. It is. There's a lot of spending coming down the pike. There's a lot of taxes, it looks like, coming down the pike. It's important to all of us. You listen to Live with Renk. We'll be right back after this with Dr. Wolfram. You're going to be hearing that in the next 3-4 years. Give a little bit more. Oh, how is this going to hurt? How is that going to hurt? Because there's a lot of spending that this current governor wants to do, increase spending. And we're looking and talking about Prop A. We did touch on it yesterday, but I was unable to get Dr. Wolfram from Hillsdale College, who holds the William E. Simon Chair of Economics at Hillsdale College, his thoughts on this, because he was quoted in the Detroit News article I read, one of many I read about it. And I asked for his opinion, and Prop A right now, capped in 1994, the growth of our taxable property values here in the state of Michigan at the rate of inflation or 5%, whatever less. So as he stated in the last segment, if the market bottomed out and you lost 30% of your value, then it would take years to regain that 30%, or let's say 20%, and inflation was 2%. It would take 10 years, thus choking off the revenue source for many of our local government units. And he was giving us his thoughts on what he would see. He believes there should be a reform of this Prop A, property tax legislation here in the state of Michigan. And really, in a quick synopsis, why don't you give us what you said in that last segment, Dr. Wolfram, and then finish the question I asked, which is what number would you use to base the recovery on? Go. Oh, wait, hold on. Now go. I'm sorry, I didn't have you on. All right, let's do this all over. Go.
Okay. The way your taxable value has always been assessed is that it's half of what they call true cash value. So
why do they do that? Why do they make it? Why don't they just do it at full?
Yes. That's a very good question.
Okay. That's a side question. It just angers me. Yeah.
It's a whole nother group of questions associated with that as well. But so basically it's half of your market value, okay? So let's say your market value goes from $100,000 to $60,000. Well, then you're going to be paying on half of the $60,000 or $30,000. So what happens then is the true cash value is supposed to be basically what the market value of your property is, or what like properties sell for. So each year, your property is assessed by your local assessor, and that determines what your taxable base is. So what I would say is that if let's say your cash value of your house went down from $100,000 to $50,000, then your taxable base would go down from 50 to 25. Well, then what I would do is say, okay, when the economy recovers and your cash value, your real value is going up by, let's say, 10%, as the assessor sees what the market value of your house is, then your tax base would go up at that same rate until you get back to where you were before. So if property values are going up by 10%, they could continue to increase your taxable base at 10% until you get to where you were when the collapse happened, and then you would go back to the Proposal A. So then it couldn't go up by more than the rate of inflation, or 5%, whichever's less.
Because you believe that due to the recession, it has starved off the cash flow, the taxes. Or I'm sorry, the revenue. The revenue, as they like to use the word revenue. But that's interesting. Real quick point. I don't know, a couple weeks ago I was talking about Senator Shirkey, who was talking about, well, we're going to have to increase revenue, and if we were to want to start adding money to these road infrastructure. And I was giving them all kinds of suggestions, because revenue is the sale of goods or services. You as an economist know that. It's the sale of goods or services. So I was giving them ideas like bake sales they could do, the senators and the Congress people. That's going to be revenue. They could sell equipment. They could do car washes in the summer. So revenue, as they like to use the word, went down so much to these local government units that they are being starved and had to postpone certain expenditures or lay off people due to that. You see it as a real problem. It's not just a fictitious problem that they're crying for more money, and something has to be addressed, and that's what your thought on reforming Proposal A would address.
Yeah, my whole principle is that we want to have local government be the government, rather than having this moving. If what happens is if your local government is starved, then what will happen is the state will say, oh, okay, well, if you do this, that, or the other thing, we will give you, we'll pay for that particular project or whatever. So you got to sort of satisfy the state bureaucrats. I'd rather have the local government raise the revenue and the local government receive its equitable share of the statewide taxes, so that your local government could decide, do we want to pave this road, or, do we want to have 6 policemen and 3 firemen, or 4 firemen and 5 policemen, or whatever?
I understand. Real quickly, because you got to get going, we only have about 3 minutes. Any thoughts on this proposed tripling of our gas tax here in the state of Michigan? It was 19.3%. January 1st, 2017, it went up to 26.3%. And by October of next year, Governor Whitmer would like to see it go up to 71.3%. Cents per gallon.
I do think that we are going to need an increase in the gas tax and dedicated to infrastructure. But, enough is as good as a feast, as Mary Poppins said. This is a pretty substantial increase. I think this is going beyond what, the average person would think is reasonable.
Well, Dr. Wolfram, what I said, by the way, on air with me is Dr. Wolfram from Hillsdale College, a great book, The Capitalist Manifesto. I hear you're writing another one, so you got to make sure you come out and tell us about that when you do. If you want to learn some basic economics in the way that he explains it on the Live with Renk Show, get that book, Capitalist Manifesto, either at Hillsdale College or Amazon. Is that correct?
Yep.
All right. Now, I just scratched some numbers this morning on a piece I wrote about it, and I ended my piece saying that if you use 20 gallons of gas a week, at the increase of 45 cents a gallon, you're looking at $500 a year. If you're a married couple, you're looking at $1,000 a year, obviously. Now, that's going to be a pretty regressive tax on people. And why, do you know any reason why they lowballed that increase in the tax that they forced on us back in 2015, which was then enacted in 2017?
Well, I mean, I think that you need to give people time to respond for one thing. I think that's part of it. And I think they underestimated the true cost that they needed to fix the roads. But there's I personally think that they're spending too much money on K-12 education, to tell you the truth. I mean, that's sort of a whole nother story. I think.
Well, I'm going to have you on that because I got a piece, as you know, large increase in school funding in 18 years through K through 12. So I'll let you get to your class, tell them Renk said hello, and I will. And they'll be like, who? They should be listening to me. That's what they should be doing. It should be required material to listen to the Live with Renk Show from time to time. Anyway, let's set something.
Don't forget to follow me on Twitter.
Oh, that's right. Real quick, we have 30 seconds. Go for it. You're in a competition with that damn journalist guy.
Right. That's right. And we're close.
You're still close. What is that? What's the Twitter?
Gary_Wolfram on Twitter.
Gary_Wolfram. Thanks a lot, Dr. Wolfram. Appreciate you coming on there.
Bye-bye.
Go ahead, take it easy. We'll have him on about the school funding because that was interesting how he dropped that. He thinks it should be less funding, not more. And again, Gary, what is it, _Wolfram at Twitter or whatever? Follow that because he's in this competition with the guy who runs the journalism school, who I met. Nice guy, but we can't let a journalist beat an economist out, can we?